After 5 years of separation, my father suddenly got in touch. His message, concise and matter-of-fact, turned out to be like a wind from the past, which picked up the dust of a long-forgotten conflict hiding under the surface of my consciousness. At first, I didn't know how to react. A slight hesitation before clicking on the notification, and a wave of memories washed over me. Our last conversation, filled with bitterness and misunderstanding, was still ringing in my ears. I was 26 years old then. Having just graduated from college, I returned home full of hopes and plans for the future. However, the meeting with my father did not bring relief. Instead of a warm welcome, I was greeted with intense stares and silent displeasure, as if I didn't belong in this house. My father kicked me out without warning, as if it were a routine matter. The reason for his anger was the accusations made by my stepmother Ellie and stepsister Sophia. They claimed that I stole Sophia's savings intended for her college studies. These accusations were like a stab in the back. I would never have allowed myself to do this, but my father, without asking a single question, believed their words unconditionally. I was not given a chance to justify myself or at least explain myself. Faced with this wall of misunderstanding, I was forced to leave the house that was supposed to be my refuge. My relationship with my father has never been perfect. My parents' divorce when I was only 7 years old left a mark on my heart, and every year the gap between us grew. When I turned 15, my father started dating Ellie. She was a widow with a daughter, Sophia, who was 4 years younger than me. From the very beginning, I felt that they didn't want me in their lives. Their polite but cold aloofness gradually turned into outright hostility. With each trip home, this atmosphere became more tense. While my father preferred to turn a blind eye to what was happening, claiming that Ellie and Sophia were supportive of me, I felt their hidden contempt more and more every time. I tried to talk to him about it, but he waved me off, convinced that I was exaggerating. However, the climax came when, returning home after a hard day, I found myself caught up in a storm of accusations. Ellie and Sophia accused me of stealing money, and Sophia claimed that her college savings disappeared because of my fault. The father did not hesitate for a second to believe them, without even trying to figure out the situation. I was stunned by his willingness to turn away from me. Now, after 5 years of silence, his unexpected message has brought all these feelings to the surface. The questions that I had been suppressing for years resurfaced in my mind. Did I do the right thing when I left? Did I have any other options? I had no idea why my stepmother, Ellie, accused me of using money meant for her daughter, Sophia. She confidently stated that I spent this money on expensive brands, financing my own purchases. Ellie didn't hesitate to claim that I had set aside her daughter's savings for my own whims. It was an absolute lie, but she managed to convince my father. Perhaps it was the cold estrangement that had accumulated over the years in our relationship that made him ready to believe in such an absurd version of events. I remember how my father stormed into my room in anger and triumphantly threw several items on the bed that were allegedly purchased with stolen money. He did not respond to my protests and attempts to explain himself. His face was contorted with rage, and I saw how he had already made a choice. The choice was not in my favor. He believed Ellie, unconditionally. When I offered to check the charges at the bank, to trace the transactions, my father refused. In his eyes, I was already guilty, and no amount of evidence could change his mind. "You're a thief," he said, and the words stabbed into me like a dagger. I desperately tried to prove my innocence, but every word I said was met with a blank wall. My father wasn't listening. His mind was clouded by anger and frustration, which, as I realized, was the long-accumulated result of all our unresolved conflicts. Heartbroken and maligned, I left the house, closing not only the door behind me, but also the chapter of my life associated with it. For the next few years, I existed in a daze, struggling with financial difficulties and loneliness. Having lost the support of my father, I found myself in a world where I had to build my life on my own. But time heals, and gradually I found my footing. I achieved success in my career, was able to establish a stable life, and even started planning to buy a house within 5 years. During this time, I avoided any contact with my father's relatives, not wanting to reopen old wounds. My mother, with whom I remained close, supported me. Her breakup with her father was caused not only by his behavior towards me, but also by the realization that their divorce opened the way for him to choose a new family, where, it seemed, I was superfluous. My mother took my side decisively, and we both cut off the part of life that had once been associated with him. However, everything changed when one day my father appeared on the doorstep of my new home, exhausted and almost unrecognizable. He came to ask for forgiveness. His voice was trembling, and there was despair in his eyes. Her father found out the truth. Ellie had built up this whole sinister scenario to hide her own lavish spending. She used the money intended for Sophia's college on herself and her daughter, buying luxury items, and then framed me, knowing that her father would not verify her words. She was afraid that if the truth came out, he would see her as a selfish woman pursuing only her own goals. Recently, after Ellie's quarrel with her parents, the whole truth came out. They told her father about her manipulations and misuse of funds. My father was horrified by how blindly he trusted her and how wrong he was in his accusations against me. Now, realizing the full extent of the deception, he filed for divorce. He was helped by his old lawyer, the man he always turned to in difficult moments. However, the divorce turned out to be difficult. Ellie and her lawyer drafted a statement in which they deliberately presented the situation in a biased way, exposing her father in an unsightly light. During our conversation, my father mentioned that one of my friend's fathers is a respected divorce lawyer. He was hoping that I would help him contact him and negotiate a fee reduction. The boldness of this request stunned me. My father thought that by apologizing, he could ask for my help again, as if those years of pain and disappointment had not happened between us. At first I couldn't help but laugh out loud, and then, quickly closing the door, I warned him to leave, otherwise I would call the police. My resolve seemed unshakable until Mom intervened. To my surprise, she criticized my decision not to help my father. She talked about how everyone makes mistakes, and that he deserves a chance to fix it. My problem went deeper than just resenting my father for his mistakes. It grew out of his choice to confide in Ellie rather than his own daughter, from all those bitter words he threw in my direction the day he kicked me out of the house. In his eyes, I turned into someone he didn't recognize, a thief, an outsider, and it was this betrayal that hurt me the most. I was aware that a lot had changed since then, but his return and asking for help seemed to me the height of cynicism. He came not only to apologize, but also to get something from me again. I couldn't help but suspect that if he hadn't needed something, if he hadn't needed my help, I would never have seen him. It had taken 5 long years for him to admit his mistake, and now that he was back, he was not only seeking redemption, but also waiting for me to do a favor for him. The mixture of bitterness and distrust left no room for forgiveness. I tried to explain this to my mother, who, to my surprise, immediately sided with my father, arguing that his admission of his mistakes, although belated, should mean something. She insisted that everyone makes mistakes and the father deserves to be forgiven. Her words were drowned in my fatigue from repeating the same thought. Yes, everyone makes mistakes, but when it comes to those who should have been the closest person to you, it's not so easy to demand forgiveness for such deep wounds. Mom couldn't figure out why it was so hard for me to let go of this grudge. I explained to her that it wasn't just his past mistakes, but the fact that he put Ellie and her lies above our relationship. It was more than just a betrayal, it was the destruction of the trust on which family ties are built. My mother tried to convince me that I should be a big man, that I should give my father a chance to rebuild our relationship. She insisted that talking to a friend might help him find the right lawyer, and I was torn between a sense of duty and bitterness. But the whole situation made me realize that simple forgiveness is not the solution. I couldn't just ignore the emotional toll that came with being reunited in such circumstances. And although the best divorce lawyers are certainly expensive, my help was not a guarantee that one of them would reduce the fee for my father. It all seemed like an extra burden that I didn't want to take on. My mother couldn't understand my point of view, and it disappointed me. Our argument turned out to be so intense that we stopped talking to each other. This quarrel made me doubt my decisions. Maybe refusing to help my father was wrong, but my mother's reaction made me think, what do I lose and what do I gain in the situation? I was torn, wondering if I had really made a mistake. Reflecting on her words and evaluating other people's comments, I came to the conclusion that I needed to distance myself from both parents. I realized that I didn't owe my father anything, especially considering that his apologies only appeared when he needed something. But as for my mother, her sudden support for my father after years of silence between them baffled me. She told me that her father, having contacted her, showed his emotions for the first time. He cried, which was extremely uncharacteristic for him. He was trying to reconnect not only with me, but with her as well. This touched her, and she decided to listen to him. Eventually, after learning about his attempts to apologize to me, she relented. However, their communication over the past 5 years has remained questionable. The whole situation made me realize that maybe my mother didn't understand me as well as I thought. If she really knew how I felt, she wouldn't have expected me to forgive my father so easily. I decided to keep my distance from both parents. I had been avoiding my father for 5 years, and it was relatively easy. But it turned out to be much more difficult to distance myself from my mother, the person who supported me all these years. Losing that connection hurt me. I knew I would have to give her time to think, maybe even apologize for my abruptness. However, if she does not understand my feelings, I will have to admit that our relationship with her may become another victim in this protracted family feud. It's a difficult situation, but it was obvious to me that, first of all, I had to protect my emotional well-being. When she said these words that my father was waiting outside in the car, hoping for my invitation, I felt something inside me snap. It was like a punch in the gut, brutal and unexpected. My heart stopped for a moment, and then began to pound with renewed vigor, dispersing a pulsating wave of frustration and rage through my body. All this time I've been trying to keep my sanity, give my mother a chance to explain herself, try to find a common language, but that was the last straw. My thoughts were confused, like thunderclouds unable to burst into rain. My father is sitting outside in the car, like some kind of director, watching the scene he planned and staged. I was sure that he expected that after our conversation I would give up, come out to him with reconciliation on my face. But no. I was no longer the kind of person who easily allowed myself to be manipulated. I felt a cold wave of anger rising inside me. All this time, his mother had been playing by his rules. Her arrival was not a sincere step towards me, but part of a plan made behind my back. She didn't come to try to understand me or reconnect with me, but to fulfill a promise she made to him, even if it meant betraying her own feelings and my trust. "Is he in the car?" I asked, my voice sounding sharper than I expected. She nodded without looking up, as if she was ashamed of her confession, and at that moment everything became completely clear. It wasn't her decision. She came to me not because she sincerely wanted to talk, but because he wanted to. She let him manipulate her the way he once did to me. "Did you really think that I would agree to this?" I continued, feeling a wave of rage wash over me. "That after everything that happened, I will go out to him as if nothing had happened, and we will pretend that all our problems can be solved with one meeting?" Mom tried to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. All this time, she was following the plan that my father had come up with, and I was no longer going to let them decide how to live my life. "You didn't come to understand me. You came because you promised him that you would bring me to him. You don't understand how painful it is to realize this, Mom. I thought you were on my side, but you're just following his instructions." My words flew like stones, one after another, destroying her defenses. She tried to justify herself again, but all I heard were empty words. The moment she confessed that she couldn't leave because she had to fulfill the promise she made to my father, everything became crystal clear to me. Her whole attempt at reconciliation had been nothing more than a ruse, and now that I realized it, I didn't have the energy to talk any further. "I don't need this. And you too. I don't want to discuss this anymore," I said, feeling everything freeze inside me. "If you really wanted to improve our relationship, you would have come without his interference. But you chose him, just like you did then." I didn't give her a chance to answer. I didn't want to listen to new excuses. "Go away," I said, quietly but firmly, and turned away, letting her know that the conversation was over. Silence hung between us like a thick fog squeezing the heart. I could hear her footsteps, slow and hesitant, as if she was still hoping that I would change my mind. But I didn't change my mind. I couldn't. All that's left of our conversation is disappointment and a sense of betrayal. When she finally left, I felt strangely relieved, mixed with bitterness. At that moment, I realized that I had lost not only my father, but also my mother. Or at least the part of it that I knew and could rely on. I stood at the window and watched her walk down the path to the car where her father was sitting. The moment of truth. They exchanged a few words, and then the car drove off. I watched them leave, feeling the cold tentacles of alienation slowly wrap around my heart. At that moment, when I stood in front of Ellie, listening to her unexpected confession, anger and confusion intertwined inside me, forming something like a hot spiral, heated to the limit. My emotions were whirling in my head, barely giving me the opportunity to comprehend her words. It was hard to believe that this wasn't just another game, that there wasn't another clever plan behind this revelation. And yet, looking into her eyes, I realized that this time she was telling the truth. The fact that Ellie was a part of this complicated family drama has always caused me rejection. But her arrival today, her desire to reveal the truth, suddenly awakened in me a strange feeling, a feeling of gratitude, albeit mixed with cold distrust. She stood in front of me not as an enemy, but rather as an accomplice in this incredibly complex tangle of family intrigues. An affair with my mother, the words came out of my mouth on their own, and I felt a lump in my throat. How could this happen? How could I not have noticed? Years of distrust, resentment, and cold alienation suddenly took on a new meaning. My father. My mother. All their decisions, all their strange actions suddenly turned into another side. They didn't just betray each other, they betrayed me. Ellie spoke quickly, as if she was afraid she would change her mind, or that I would stop her. Her words sounded dry, without emotion, as if she had long ago come to terms with this and was just making her last attempt to settle all this madness. But each of her new stories seemed to stab a sharp knife into my heart. I couldn't contain my irritation and disappointment. Is that why Mom sided with him? I asked, hardly believing what I had heard. Tears were coming to my eyes, but I didn't let them show. Did she agree to help him because they were having an affair? Because she was afraid that she would lose everything that they had hidden together? Ellie nodded, her face remained silent, but I noticed the same confusion and fatigue in her eyes. At that moment, I realized that she, too, had become a victim in this complicated story, albeit through her own fault. She was forced to live among lies, manipulation, and betrayal just like me. Only now, when everything was revealed, she seemed to be trying to get rid of this burden too. I know it's hard, she added, taking a step back as if to leave. But I thought you should know the truth before making final decisions. I grinned, not even trying to hide my sarcasm. All my decisions have already been made. My family, if you can call it that. He will never come back into my life. I knew it sounded like a final verdict to her, but I no longer had the desire and strength to fight these people, as it turned out, had been plotting behind my back all this time. Ellie nodded, apparently realizing that she couldn't change anything. She came, told her truth, and was now ready to leave, leaving me with this new load of knowledge. When she left, the silence in the house seemed unnaturally loud. I stood staring into the void, trying to put my thoughts together. Every word Ellie said was still echoing in my head. My mother, my father, their conspiracy, their hidden plans. It all turned out to be more complicated and dirtier than I could have imagined. I felt relieved when I was finally alone. Calm returned to my house, but now it seemed somehow artificial, as if it had been broken. I was trying to figure out how to move on with this knowledge, how to come to terms with the fact that my parents turned out to be completely different from who I thought they were. I returned to the living room, sat down on the sofa and closed my eyes, feeling fatigue gradually take over me. My life has always been surrounded by chaos, family conflicts, financial problems, betrayal of loved ones. But for the first time in a long time, I felt that this chapter of my life was coming to an end. I was no longer a part of their games, their manipulations. Now I could live the way I wanted, without their participation. However, something inside me was still stirring. Ellie's words about her mother still wouldn't get out of her head. My mother betrayed me, but stayed by my side all these years.